We've reached lesson 178, and this is one of those reviews that arrives at exactly the right moment. Not by accident. The course doesn't work by accident. It works through recognition. And what these two lessons ask of us is precisely that: to recognize what is already true, but what the mind insists on denying. The lessons we revisit today are 165 and 166, and the two share something that goes far beyond their titles. Both speak of something you already have, and that for some reason you keep forgetting you have. God is but love, and therefore so am I. Let that statement come in, not as pretty words, but as a declaration about what is real, about what you are, regardless of what you may be feeling right now, regardless of what happened yesterday or what you fear may happen tomorrow. Maybe today is an easy day. Maybe it isn't. But this statement doesn't depend on how the day is going. It precedes the day. It precedes everything. And that is exactly what today's lessons teach us. Lesson 165. Let not my mind deny the thought of God. There's a question at the beginning of this lesson that seems simple but goes deep. What makes this world appear real? The Course's answer is not what most people would expect. Not gravity, not matter, not the accumulated history of experience. What makes the world appear real is your own denial of the truth that exists beyond it. It is your thoughts of misery and death that obscure the perfect happiness and eternal life that the Father wills for you. That is a powerful statement, because it completely inverts the way we normally think about the problem. We usually believe we are sad because something bad happened, that we are afraid because the world is dangerous, that we suffer because life is like that. The Course says the opposite. Suffering is not caused by the world. It is caused by the decision to deny what lies beyond the world. And what lies beyond the world? The thought of God. But what is the thought of God? Not one thought among many others, not an idea that comes and goes, like the thoughts that cross the mind all day long. The Course says something that, when truly absorbed, changes everything. The thought of God created you and never left you, not for an instant. Think about that. Not as a metaphor, as a fact. You have never been separated from the thought that created you. It belongs to you. It is through it that you live. It is your source, not in the past, not in the future, but now, in this exact moment, the thought of God dwells within you, illuminating your mind with happiness and love. Eternity shines in you because that thought never departed. So why don't we feel it? Because we deny it. Not necessarily consciously or deliberately, but every time we choose to see the world as real and final, every time we believe fear is telling the truth, every time we treat separation as a fact, we are denying the presence of what never left us. The Course uses a touching image. It says that this thought watches over you, softens your resting place, smooths your path. This is not the language of effort or achievement. It is the language of care, of a love that doesn't need to be earned because it is already what you are. And the question the Course asks next is almost a challenge. Who, knowing where their peace, their joy, their healing, and their rest abide, would deny them? Who, knowing where the treasure is, would choose to keep wandering in poverty? The honest answer is us, often. Not because we are foolish, but because the ego has convinced the mind that denial is protection, that keeping the world real is necessary for survival, that letting go of control, even if it's control over an illusion, is dangerous. But the Course has an answer for that too. You don't need to be certain. You don't need to feel that you believe completely before you practice. Ask with desire, even if it's a small desire, even if it's still mixed with doubt. Openness is enough. Willingness is the beginning, and the Course makes a promise. When you receive, you will know you have found the treasure you have always sought. Not because someone convinced you, but because the experience itself carries its own certainty. This is not blind faith. It is trust based on what is real. And what is real never goes away. It only waits to be recognized. Lesson 166. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. If Lesson 165 asks us why we deny what we already have, Lesson 166 goes one step further. It shows us the portrait of someone living in that denial, and that portrait is uncomfortably familiar. The Course describes a figure wandering the world in poverty and weariness, worn clothing, feet that bleed a little from the rocky road, a growing sense of futility, of the horizon shrinking with every step. This person is surrounded by gifts they cannot see. They carry a treasure so immense that everything the world contains would be insignificant beside it, and yet they wander in misery, convinced they are alone. Have you ever recognized yourself in that figure? Most of us have, not necessarily in extreme circumstances, but in that feeling that something is missing, that you arrived too late or too early, that others seem to have access to something you can't find. The Course says that feeling is not evidence that the gifts don't exist. It is evidence that you have chosen not to look at them. And why would someone do that? Because accepting the gifts of God threatens the world the ego has built. If you truly receive what God offers, peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, joy that needs no cause, love that cannot be lost, then what remains of the defense system the ego has spent a lifetime building? The ego understands, even when the conscious mind does not, that accepting the gifts is the end of the illusion of separation. And so it resists. It calls acceptance naivete. It points to everything that could go wrong. It insists that this world is the only possible home, even though it's a home where you never truly feel at home. But then something happens. The Course describes it with a beautiful image: the touch of Christ upon your shoulder. Just a touch. A gentle perception that perhaps you are not as alone as you thought, that perhaps the miserable self you thought you were is not your real identity, that perhaps God's gifts are true, and that perhaps He has not been entirely defeated by your plan to forget them. And here the Course says something that is one of the most liberating teachings in the entire workbook. The will of God does not oppose. It simply is. God is not in conflict with you. He is not competing with your plans, not waiting for the right moment to punish, not disappointed with the path you have chosen. He simply is. And what He is, love, abundance, peace, life, continues to be true about you regardless of how long you have spent believing otherwise. Now we are living, the Course says, because now we cannot die. The wish for death, in all the forms we saw in Lesson 163, the fear, the anxiety, the grief, receives an answer. And the answer is, it is not so. It is not what you think. It is not what you are. But this lesson goes beyond receiving. It reminds us of something that is easy to forget. The gifts are not for you alone. That is central. The Course says that the touch of Christ has made you like Him, and what you have received now needs to be learned how to give. Not because anyone demands it, but because it is the nature of love. Love that does not extend is not love. It is only an idea about love. And how do you give? Not necessarily with words or teachings. The Course is very concrete here, through your happiness, through your state of peace, through the living example of a mind that has accepted God's gifts and been transformed by them. When you are well, truly well, with the peace that doesn't depend on the day having gone as planned, that teaches. When you choose not to be dragged into the sadness the ego offers that heals those around you. When you show, through your presence, that it is possible to live differently, you are fulfilling exactly what this lesson describes. Being the living proof of what the touch of Christ can offer. How to practice today. The Course asks us for regularity and commitment throughout the day. At the start of each hour, a moment of return, brief but genuine, to the affirmations of this lesson. Let not my mind deny the thought of God. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. God is but love, and therefore so am I. Not as ritual, but as an anchor point, a reminder of where you are, of who you are, of what is true when the mind begins to drift into denial. And throughout the day, whenever that feeling of poverty appears, not necessarily financial, but that inner feeling that something is missing, that you are not enough, that the world owes you something, use that moment. Not to suppress what you feel, but to offer it to the Holy Spirit. To say sincerely, I do not need to see this the way I am seeing it. That small gesture is the beginning of acceptance, and acceptance is all the Course asks. These two lessons together form a complete arc. Lesson 165 shows us that what we seek is already present, and that only our denial hides it. Lesson 166 shows us that when we stop denying and begin to receive, something changes. Everything you truly are was never lost. The thought of God is not something you need to reach. It is what sustains you now, in this instant, as you hear these words. And the gifts He has entrusted to you are neither hidden nor distant. They are here. They always were, waiting only for you to stop denying their presence. And when you recognize them, you become what you always were, the love of God expressed in the world. Not in perfection, not without stumbling, but in direction, in willingness, in growing openness to what is real. That is enough. That has always been enough. Thank you so much. See you in the next lesson.